Okay, I think we can just go ahead and start this one. Hello, everybody. My name is Snorri, and I will be your host here at this webinar. This is our third webinar in the series, See Everything at Once, and our last webinar of the year. And today we will be talking about the future of sleep medicine. And we titled this one, is it time to change course? And today's speaker is a perfect one for this particular topic. Dr. Seema Khosla, medical director of the North Dakota Center for Sleep. I asked her to take on this very interesting topic because I know she is very, forward-thinking and futuristic, if you will. I'm very much looking forward to hear what she has to offer. But before I introduce you properly, I really want to welcome everyone here, obviously, and this is a really dear topic to us at Knox Medical and Knox Health. We believe that we as a technology provider in this field should be, very current, and we should be very agile, and we just should, try to see what changes are ahead of us, and we should also participate in making those changes. So this is why we want to welcome you to this particular webinar, and hopefully we will have some very interesting conversations after Dr. Khosla's presentation. But let me introduce her now properly, a rock star in the field of sleep medicine. As I said, medical director of North Dakota Center for Sleep, active within the AASM, to say the least, and served on numerous AASM committees, including the original Telemedicine task force, a very interesting task force, inaugural chair for clinical and consumer sleep technology. Again, very, very interesting topic for future of sleep medicine. And she is the current chair for the new AASM Public Awareness Advisory Committee. She's also a medical advisor for MedBridge Healthcare and is the host of the really, really fun and interesting podcast, the AASM podcast, Talking Sleep. So welcome, Seema.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll have to give you $5 for saying all those nice things about me. So like Snorri was saying, they asked us to kind of talk about sleep services after COVID. I have no disclosures. So I wanted to start by sharing a story with you. So we, in the last couple of years, created a state sleep society for North Dakota and South Dakota. So this is something I've never done before. And so we went to somebody that was going to help us with the paperwork. And one of the first questions he asked us is, well, how much are you going to charge for membership? And so I looked at my colleague and we said, $50? And then we quickly changed it. We're like, no, 25. And so this person that we were visiting looked at me and he said, why not 100? He taught me to look at things through a lens of abundance rather than scarcity. So since that time, I hear his words echo when I am facing a new challenge. So in our world, we have gotten used to things being taken away and having to settle for what is left, right? Home sleep apnea testing has largely replaced polysomnography. And this is probably because we focused so much on the AHI. And as my colleague Doug Kirsch likes to say, there are cheaper ways to get an AHI. Consumer sleep technology is becoming better. And at some point, it may ultimately become diagnostic for obstructive sleep apnea testing. This is a scary thought, right? It can be intimidating. There is a paper published in the journal Sleep this year that demonstrated that there are wearables that are actually better than actigraphy in detecting sleep versus wakefulness. We know a lot of these wearables have oximetry. Many of them detect snoring and respirations. You can see that some of them even have headbands to collect EEG signal. So clearly, this technology is advancing and becoming more sophisticated. It is plausible that consumer-facing sleep technology may replace home sleep apnea testing for the diagnosis of OSA. We know that tech industry giants like Apple and Google and Fitbit have invested heavily in sleep. So does this mean the end of our field? So I realized that I had again fallen back to looking at things through the lens of scarcity rather than abundance, right? Consumer sleep technologies coming to take away our testing. We've been having this conversation for years. And so I have to kind of remind myself that we are sleep medicine specialists and not OSA specialists. And then to ask, isn't there any more value that we can provide? Obstructive sleep apnea is heterogeneous, and there is important data contained within the EEG that can help us help our patients. And so maybe I should be asking the question, is obstructive sleep apnea testing all I need to help a patient? Okay, so yes, sometimes you'll have somebody with a very high pre-test probability for obstructive sleep apnea. You do a home sleep apnea test, you get a diagnosis, you start treatment, and they get better, right? But there are other times where maybe they get better, but not all the way better. Will looking at their sleep architecture help me figure out why they are still symptomatic? What about patients with non-OSA disorders, right? What about insomnia or narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia? What about using our own complex diagnostic algorithms with AI and machine learning to collect deeper physiologic data from our polysomnographies? So earlier this year, the AASM hosted a competition where we were challenged to reimagine the diagnosis of obstructive sleep apnea. The winning entry was submitted by my colleague, Dr. Amy Bender, and her team out of Canada. So they proposed performing polysomnography in the home, and they really talked about this abundance of information that is contained within the EEG. So in our world, we really have focused largely on respiratory patterns, right? And we're looking for sleep apnea. But there is more data that we are seeing about the potential diagnostic value of sleep EEG. So this is something that was just published. It was a study in China, and they looked at the relationship between sleep EEG and Alzheimer's disease. And so when you read this article, it reminds us that the main pathological changes of Alzheimer's disease are the accumulation of beta amyloid and phosphorylated tau. And so you can measure this in the spinal fluid, right? But that's obviously invasive. And the reality is that by the time you have that accumulation, you really can't do much to reverse those changes. And so they propose that analysis of sleep architecture might be of value in early detection, but also monitoring of disease progression. So when we think about the relationship between sleep and neurodegenerative disease, we think about REM sleep behavior disorder, right? But there are more studies showing us that sleep disorders also happen in other diseases like frontotemporal dementia, ALS, and Alzheimer's. They see abnormal sleep-wake cycles in Alzheimer's. You also see hypersomnolence, reduced non-REM sleep and delta sleep, and more nocturnal awakenings. And so they have postulated for years now that beta amyloid is related to the loss of slow wave sleep. They also think that this tauopathy is related to the loss of slow wave sleep, but then they go on to describe this relationship between slow wave activity and spindle coupling that actually can predict medial temporal lobe tau burden. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I'm a pulmonologist, I'm not a neurologist, so I really had to do kind of a lot of more of a deep dive to understand what this means. So what this means is that there are sleep EEG changes that might be predictive and might actually serve as a biomarker. So then, of course, the next question might be, well, okay, fine, maybe we should do more nocturnal EEG, right? But they found that patients with Alzheimer's also have a higher incidence of obstructive sleep apnea. And this may be something treatable to help slow the progression of disease. So a few years ago, I was honored to be in the audience and listen to Dr. Charles Czeisler, who kind of talked about where this idea came from. He talked to us about what happens during sleep. He told us about mice and what they look like under the microscope. And so he asked us to imagine that our brains are like big cities with big, huge, tall buildings, okay? And all day long, people are tossing debris out of the window into the alleys, and the garbage truck comes and sweeps all of that debris away. So all day long, they're tossing this out into the streets. And so when we sleep, those tall buildings shrink and the alleys become wide, and all of that debris gets taken away. And so when they analyze that debris, one component of it is beta amyloid, which we already know is a substance that builds up with Alzheimer's. So this is what those researchers were referring to. And so if we look at it under the microscope, this is what it actually looks like. So here in the purple are fluid channels, and the green are the glia. And what you're seeing here is waste being flushed into the blood vessels. And so we already know, right, that sleep is important for the clearance of debris. This is a depiction of what happens at a cellular level. So during wakefulness, there isn't as much interstitial space, so the spinal fluid can't really flow as freely. And so as a result, these metabolites build up. With sleep, they've noted a 60% increase in interstitial space. And so that allows for better spinal fluid flow, which leads to better clearance of these metabolites. Sleep disorders themselves can also lead to poor clearance of beta amyloid. So not only is the EEG a mechanism to screen for and monitor the progression of neurodegenerative disease, it can also evaluate for sleep disordered breathing, which of course then can be treated. So the importance of EEG and PSG has been discussed for years. Dr. Menino a few years ago presented this concept of hypnodensity, okay? And he thought that it might be possible to diagnose narcolepsy based on the PSG alone. So his work was based on multiple scores using neural networks and predictive modeling. So the idea of hypnodensity is that it is the probability distribution per stage of sleep for a person with narcolepsy, and without narcolepsy on top and with narcolepsy on the bottom. So just to orient you to what this means, the white is when they're awake, the red is stage 1 sleep, the light blue is N2 sleep, the dark blue is N3 sleep, and the black is REM. So if you look at that non-narcoleptic subject on top, you kind of see more wakefulness at the beginning, right? And more delta early, and it cycles. And then you see more REM toward morning. This is a pretty normal distribution of sleep architecture. Now look at the bottom hypnogram. Do you see this narcoleptic patient? Do you see how they have a lot of REM early? And they have REM sort of tossed in throughout the entire study? So this generates almost a signature. And so they're postulating that this can be used as a biomarker for the diagnosis of narcolepsy using polysomnography without even needing MSLT. And so again, our quest to focus on the AHI, maybe it's caused us to turn almost a blind eye to the rich data that is contained within the sleep architecture. So did we go too far? Do we need to slow down and change course? So a cardiology colleague of mine reminds me that an echo is more than just the EF. And I think the sleep corollary of this is that the PSG is more than just the AHI. So we have largely focused on the AHI. And so then it follows that our field has been shaped by the cheapest way to get an AHI. So is now the time to reevaluate this paradigm? Sleep medicine is not just OSA medicine. I think we can all agree that our current metrics are not ideal, right? The AHI is easy to measure and it provides us with some information, but clearly it is far from perfect. So perhaps we need to be willing to challenge our current paradigm and explore the abundance of data that is available within the PSG and to determine how to use this to better serve our patients. So let's get back to Dr. Bender's group. They advocated for PSG in the home, and many groups have worked on self-applied electrodes, for example. So Dr. Bender's group also created a new scoring system called the odds ratio product, or ORP. And so this is a measure of sleep depth rather than our current scoring rules. So here's a video that she shared with me that I'd like to share with you.
Complex electrical activity can be described by a combination of waves through a mathematical process called a Fourier Transform. When a Fourier Transform is performed on a sample of EEG data, it yields 4 waves of different frequency and different heights. When these 4 waves are added together mathematically, they produce the original piece of EEG. The ORP examines the same EEG data as traditional studies, but summarizes a very detailed analysis into a simple number which measures the quality of sleep along a sleep depth scale. The patient is fully awake at 2.5 and fully asleep at 0. Now, if we add ORP to the EEG, we can see a significant difference in depth of sleep. Line D and E are both traditionally called stage 2, but they range widely in ORP scores, with one being 1.2 and one being 0.4. Line E and F are very similar in terms of ORP, and yet are different stages using the R and K rules. And so the depth of sleep scale provided by the ORP may be a better way of assessing quality of sleep than the traditional rules.
So this is a comparison, and she provided this for us. You can see that there are 3 patients, and if you look at the top, they share a fairly similar sleep architecture when we use our conventional scoring rules. But then look at the bottom, that ORP architecture. Do you see how different it is between the 3 different patients? And so what I'm wondering is that maybe this insight will allow us to show our patients a before and after picture, which may encourage them to really stick with their treatment. You know, for me, I have found that sometimes it's not the AHI, which helps patients understand the severity of their disorder. It is when I talk about their nadir saturation and their longest respiratory event, right? It hits home when they know that their longest respiratory event was 68 seconds and their oxygen saturation went down to 72. I mean, those are numbers that stick with them. And I think it motivates them to be on treatment because they A, can personalize it, that it's theirs, and B, they understand that this is something that is actionable. And so what I'm wondering is maybe this ORP insight will also not only help motivate our patients, but as clinicians, will it allow us to maybe learn more about their sleep? And are there other ways that we can help them to sleep better? We already know that obstructive sleep apnea is prevalent, but it's definitely not a one size fits all, right? So here's a comparison of 2 patients with severe obstructive sleep apnea. One's got an AHI of 50, one's got an AHI of a little over 40. And look at the ORP difference in their sleep architecture, right? This really speaks to the heterogeneity of obstructive sleep apnea. And can this information at some point, will this help us with maybe endotyping? And let's also consider this, right? This is important to talk about, that we know that home sleep apnea testing can underestimate the presence of sleep apnea. And when we look here at the hypnogram, we see wakefulness before sleep onset and wakefulness in the morning, right? As well as 2 periods of wakefulness at night. So when you add a sleep measure, you're able to exclude those areas from analysis. And what I'm wondering is, will this lead to fewer false negative studies? Right at this point, when we have a negative home sleep apnea test, our algorithm dictates that they need to come in for an in-lab polysomnography. But what if we made that initial test a little bit more robust and saved our patients from having to have yet another test? So the idea of home EEG isn't new. This is a study that was published in the JCSM in 2017, and they talked about this device that had multi-channel frontopolar EEG recordings, and they thought that it would improve the assessment of sleep architecture and sleep continuity biomarkers. And so on this study, they noted that there were special sort of sleep spindle characteristics during non-REM sleep that were associated with cognitive decline in patients with Parkinson's. And again, they reiterated this idea that reduced slow wave sleep is associated with increased beta amyloid linked to Alzheimer's. So you can see this concept's been around for a while. Will routine monitoring of sleep then will be helpful in the evaluation of risk of these patients before they develop symptoms? Is this the right time that we can intervene to prevent those cognitive changes? So the argument can always be made that, hang on now, patients will tell us when they need help, right? We usually don't have to look very far to get somebody, to help us uncover insomnia symptomatology. But this relies on the accuracy of self-reporting. Is there an EEG signature with insomnia patients that can then predict the patients that will respond to CBTI? This JCSM article also suggests that the ability to predict normal sleep duration based on EEG and sleep biomarkers may actually allow them to reset their expectations around sleep duration. Maybe their normal sleep is 6.5 to 7 hours, but they're reading all of the stuff saying that they need to get 8 hours. And as a result, they become increasingly more frustrated and more consumed with their sleep. And so maybe this objective measurement where we can say, you know what, you're a 6.5 hour sleeper and it's okay. Maybe that will help them with their insomnia. They also hypothesize that sleep biomarkers may indicate anxiety and depression, and you could actually pick out whether they have stress-related insomnia. So will these insights then allow us to provide more value to our patients and to our non-sleep medicine colleagues? So we have an opportunity before us to really help improve the lives of our patients. There's new data showing us that patients with sleep apnea and nocturnal hypoxia may have worse COVID outcomes. We see a lot of multidisciplinary long COVID clinics that are run across the country, right? And they're usually headed by pulmonary or neuro or PM&R. And so we have proposed that sleep clinicians also be included in these clinics, right? We see that there are a lot of sleep-related complaints. So these patients may benefit from not just an assessment of sleep apnea, right? Like with a home test, which is easy enough to order, but maybe a more thorough evaluation of their sleep architecture and circadian rhythms and other sleep disorders, right? These patients deserve a complete assessment of something that might be treatable. It must be incredibly frustrating for these patients to hear that there are no good solutions. Is there something that we can uncover in their sleep that might be actionable? So we know that we're seeing a lot more of these COVID-related sleep disorders, right? The COVIDsomnia, the hypersomnia that we're seeing after COVID. Are we missing important EEG information by using these flow-based home sleep apnea tests? Is there value in assessing the sleep architecture in this group of patients that have had COVID? And is that information actionable? Will they have a sleep architecture signal with long COVID patients? So, telemedicine used to be something that we advocated for in the past. We've done it for about 13 years where I am. And for years, we've talked about how this is a really great way to reduce barriers. But the reality is that it only became a viable option once it was financially feasible due to the public health emergency from the COVID-19 pandemic. And in that time, we adapted rapidly to this plethora of changes. And so now, more than a year and a half later into this pandemic, we're kind of seeing a new landscape, aren't we? So 1 out of 5 healthcare workers has left their profession. It is harder to recruit sleep technologists. We always have an opening for sleep tech. The reality is that COVID is still there, and we need to protect our staff. And yet, with COVID, there's more sleep disturbance, right? And so there's this need to provide appropriate care to our patients. So how do we navigate safety with the need for more detailed testing? So this was published from a group in Canada, and it evaluated the cost effectiveness of level 2 studies. So meaning PSG in the home, unattended, full polysomnography. And they indicated that it may provide substantial cost savings. They argue that it allows for safer collection of physiologic data while also allowing patients to remain in familiar surroundings. So what has stopped us from shifting PSG into the home? So in the US, there is a billing code, but it's a G code. And so it hasn't been assigned an RVU value. And so you could argue that you could bill us under 95800, but the reality is that this is going to cost more than the current devices do that already satisfy this criteria. There may be some payers here and there that cover a type 2 test, but it's certainly not the majority. In medicine, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? Like Dr. Guilleminault, Dr. Dement. And now we have this other generation with Dr. Mignot and Dr. Bender and others who are willing to consider changing course. So what does that look like? Is it advocacy? Is it lobbying? Or is it just a willingness to consider other options and to not keep doing the things that we've been doing just because it's the way we've always done it, right? So clearly there are so many possibilities here that can allow us to improve the sleep health of our communities. Our touch point is our patient. So the decision for whether or not we need to change course really depends on whether it will ultimately benefit our patients, right? We don't just test for the sake of testing. We test if it will change our management of our patient. Just because we can do something, it doesn't mean that we should. So as we advance in our field, we have to be certain that advancement is because we think it is helpful, not just because technology has the ability to do so. Technology has allowed us to collect more data, and I'm hoping that this translates into new excitement for our field and further exploration of sleep disorders, and circadian science. So with that, I challenge you to shift your scarcity mindset and begin to look at the abundance of possibilities in our field. And I'm happy to take any questions. I'm going to leave my email up here, as well as contact information for Dr. Bender in case you have questions about the ORP.
Thank you, Dr. Khosla. This was really interesting, and because I'm running the show here as the host, I will throw the first question at you, and I have multiple questions here. But the first one, because you started talking a little bit about the tech giants, Apple, Google, Fitbit, entering the sleep space, and we have wondered about this. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? The good thing is obviously that they're bringing awareness. People are thinking about their sleep, but they also claim to give sleep architecture. And what's your opinion on that? Because they're not using EEG for that.
I think it's kind of funny. I'm a glasses half full kind of person, right? I'm a silver lining person. So I really like the idea that they are increasing awareness of sleep disorders. I also think it's really important for us as clinicians to have a seat at the table, right? So they might be exploring all these things that technology can do, and it's up to us to figure out, well, okay, what should it do? What is helpful information, right? What is actionable? What will help us take care of our patients and not just collect a bunch of garbage? And so that partnership, I think, is really important. For years, we've had this concern about, oh my gosh, sleep tech is coming and it's going to take away our jobs and it's going to take away our livelihood. And a few years ago, I had the opportunity to speak with Connor Hennigan. He's this really smart guy at Fitbit. And he envisions in the future that maybe you'll wake up and there'll be a message on your phone that says, hey, we think you're at risk of sleep apnea. And can you click here and launch a telemedicine visit, right, with a sleep doc and upload that Fitbit data and see if that is helpful, right? Because maybe that is screening somebody is hypoxic and has a lot of snoring and they have no idea, right? They live alone. And so maybe we can harness this to really tackle, we know 80% of sleep apnea is undiagnosed. And we really have to be honest about why that is, right? Is it because we're inaccessible, we're expensive, sleep is fragmented, and we lack awareness? So maybe these tech giants will help us with some of that.
Yeah, that's a good one. By the way, I just put up a poll. Hopefully you can all answer that one. I'm going to have one more question for you before I go into the poll and the poll results in a minute. But a little bit related to this one, because obviously, if we have it on our watch, we sleep with the watch every day. We have the Oura Ring or what have you. This new technology, this will give us a much more metadata. And we have wondered, I mean, would it make sense to have for people like spot checks every year, every half a year with a proper sleep diagnostic test? Is it a feasible way of looking at, you know, your own body, your own sleep, as you know, you would take your car once a year to the garage to have it checked? Is this something, you know, where we should be heading, because sleep is such a vital, you know, part of our health? Is that something that we need to, you know, start thinking about?
I think that's really interesting, you know, because right now the focus of a sleep test is to find something treatable. And it's not necessarily an evaluation of, is this appropriate sleep, right? And we always have this asterisk with our sleep studies of, well, yeah, their sleep was fragmented, but they're away from home and it was the wires and it was weird, you know, but to have that longitudinal data, I mean, that's a really interesting thing that you bring up. And I wonder if you could set guardrails of, if you meet these criteria, that yes, you probably should have a more thorough sleep evaluation. Because my concern is that if we're just testing people just to look and curiosity's sake, what question are we trying to answer with the test? Unless they have these, you know, entrance criteria.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you bring up a good point with the Alzheimer patients, and you know, could there be an indication way earlier in the EEG data? We could actually catch patients earlier, you know, by treating them earlier, either for the OSA
fascinating
or the things. So you know, it could be like if you have a engine light on your car, you go get it checked. If you have some sort of an engine light on your watch, or
should it be age appropriate screening?
Yeah.
Or should it be in high risk patients? Or should it be, you know, do we need to tailor it? And if you have a family member with some sort of neurodegenerative disease, do we do it like colonoscopy? And do you get tested 10 years earlier?
Yeah, but is that feasible? And
right.
Maybe one question again from me, and then we have some questions in the Q&A. What should researchers be focusing on to move sleep to, you know, to a better place than it is today? You know, it's a really big question. I know it's a broad question, but what if you could pick, you know, a direction that everyone should be focusing on?
You know, it's so funny that you say that, because I just was speaking with somebody who has this extensive history of working at the NIH, and he was really, it was fascinating, because he was telling me all these things I didn't know about how, you know, we've kind of been so focused on sleep apnea, and that we really do have to carve out more of a niche for our field, right? Because now we have the American Heart Association that released a paper talking about the importance of screening for sleep apnea. And so, well, you know, we need to still talk about the other things that are important, right? Like circadian science and all these other things. And we probably do need to do a better job. He told me that there are a lot of grants available for sleep that nobody ever applies for. And that the reality is, by the time you have you have an idea for a grant to doing the research and so on and so forth, it's 10 years before you have that impact. And so we probably need to be talking to our young, you know, researchers and anybody that maybe has an inkling of what's cool about our field, what should we grow, and then really encourage them to do more research in that field and develop it, so it's not just sleep apnea.
Yeah. So there's one question here. Let me see. We'll answer this one live. This is a tremendous presentation. I agree. What do you consider the optimal use for HSAT?
You know, I think so much of what we do is dictated by insurance. And so, yes, of course, high pretest probability sleep apnea. But I guess what I would ask you to consider is, when we see them in follow-up, to really have your antenna up for, okay, fine, we have one answer, but is it the answer? That's what we're always taught in fellowship, right? You have a critically ill patient, you have one answer. Is it the answer? You keep looking until their symptoms are gone. And to have an honest discussion about expectations. Some people expect the CPAP is going to make everything better, right? And then they just accept that, okay, this is as good as it's going to get. And maybe we need to be better about advocating for them and educating them. Well, you know what? There is this post-PAP hypersomnia. You can have another sleep disorder. It is treatable. Let's look. And it helps us, I think, to partner with our patients that way.
And do you think, just following up on that, do you think most of the patients that go through one HSAT, do you think that's going to be the only sleep test that they go to in America? You know, is that the reality?
I think for a lot of people it is, which is unfortunate. You know, Dennis Wang has done a lot of work on multi-night HSAT, and if it's at, you know, if it's better than PSG, but again, it comes down to what is the question you're asking? Is the question, do you have sleep apnea, yes or no? Then yeah, HSAT is cheaper. But if you're asking the question, hey, your dad has Alzheimer's and your mom has whatever, and you're starting to have memory loss, yeah, you probably need more evaluation. You know, we probably need to, you know, it's so funny. We're so used to just sort of giving in to what insurance wants. I think we've all lost our steam for fighting insurance companies. And maybe now, you know, we're letting them dictate what is right. And fine, if we're looking for an HI, fine, let's do a cheap test. But maybe we're not just looking for the HI. Maybe we're looking for something else. And that I think we need to, you know, maybe advocate for a little bit better. And part of that advocacy is having the data to support what we want to do. We can't just say we think it's going to be helpful for this. We need to have data that shows that yes, this is actionable and this is impactful, and it's something that we need to be doing.
That's good. Let's go to the poll then. So we asked a lot of interesting questions, and I'm just gonna start with the first one because I always find it interesting, especially when you talk about, you know, insurance companies. We don't have a code for level 2 studies, but still, I think every time we ask this question, 50% or more say they do level 2 studies, and I wonder, and this gives me hope, obviously, because I think it's important to have level 2 PhD studies, as you demonstrated in your presentation. So your thought on this, you know, the first question, is this what you are seeing as well in your field?
I wish we were doing level 2s. No, I'm surprised that you know 21% are saying that they don't perform polysomnography. I'm surprised by that.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's all HSAT based. And I also, the caveat is also, well, why aren't you doing it? Is it because you don't have a tech? Or is it because you're choosing to do more home sleep apnea testing? Is it insurance dictated? I mean, where does that come from? Do you have a telemedicine practice and not a lab?
Yeah. So that's really, really interesting one. Number 2, it seems like most of the people are agree on what's the most important part or feature of a good PhD system. So that's the signal quality, and maybe that's also, you know, where technology providers such as Knox or other companies out there, you know, maybe we have failed in a sense that, you know, creating more simpler devices means that we are jeopardizing signal quality. And so I guess this is where we need to be focusing, you know, keep the signal quality, but make it you know, make it more no, make it less complex, obviously, because it has to be feasible. Are there any other things you know, that you would look into for a PhD system?
You know, it's funny, we've had to battle this recently. I think some of it's not just the device, but it's how it interacts and interfaces with your EMR and how usable it is. You know, for some devices, we're having to do a lot of extra work that actually eliminates any cost savings from these other devices. And so I think manufacturers need to be thoughtful about how, you know, it's not just acquiring the signal, it's how do you go from the patient's sleep to the signal to the tech to the clinician that's looking at the study. You know, how do you make that more robust and less cumbersome?
And do you feel like, you know, with polysomnography, do you feel like there's a consensus among specialists in the field what is the most important signal, and, you know, what you should keep in there? No, what would
He told me once that if you have four scientists in a room, you'll have 5 opinions.
Yeah.
I thought that was really pretty telling. You know, I think, and I think maybe part of it is bias. I mean, I'm a pulmonologist, and so, you know, I'm sure my neurology colleagues spend a lot, they're better at the EEG. Like when I have something that I think looks like a seizure, for example, I'm screenshotting it and sending it to my friends, and I'm making a big, huge deal out of it because I'm not as confident in that as like my neurology friends. So I will always defer to them. But I think maybe because of that, I try to look for it more because I really want to make sure I don't miss it. You know, and so I think it really, and it depends on your practice, right? Yeah. Like if you have a lot of OSA, you're going to be looking at those respiratory signals and probably the EKG and you know, arousals and that sort of thing. versus if you have more of like this neurodegenerative patient, you're going to be paying more attention to the EEG.
It's an unfair question from me. I knew there are a lot of opinions on this, but so this is also a very interesting one. In your opinion, what long-term effect will changes in post-COVID have on how we perform sleep studies? And people could check multiple boxes here, but the one on top is we will be shifting towards more home sleep testing.
Mm-hmm.
And and this is what you were potentially talking about. We just need to be careful what home sleep testing actually means, right?
Exactly. Is it home sleep apnea testing, or is it a measure of sleep, and not a surrogate measure, but an actual signal, an EEG signal?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's kind of this conundrum, right? That now sleep, I think in the last 2 years, people are recognizing that health is important and sleep is an important part of health.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we optimize it? And then we have long COVID where people are really sleepy. And then is this an alerting mechanism issue? Is it a fragmented sleep issue? Like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, and I really feel like it's actionable. I really feel like we have something to offer these patients. I mean, I can't imagine. Can you imagine having long COVID and having somebody tell you, sorry, there's not a whole lot we can do. We don't know.
Yeah.
We need to look for the stuff that we do know, at least rule that out and treat it.
Okay. There's actually a question related to this. Is there any EEG abnormalities noted in post-COVID patients?
I haven't seen anything written up. We've kind of looked to see, because there's so many different subtypes, I think, of symptoms. I almost wonder if this will be kind of like those like post-viral syndromes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you get some EEG slowing, or do you get a lot of like sleep fragmentation and an inability, sort of that where you have more stage 1, stage 2, and not a ton of delta.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I kind of wonder if that's what we'll see.
We'll only see this if we have EEG studies paid.
Well, guys, see, that's a good point. You're right. That's a good point.
So the last question here, what future changes do you see for your in-laboratory sleep studies? And this is a very interesting one. And talking about telemedicine services and telemedicine future sleep, this is an important topic.
I still do telemedicine. I'm actually only in the office on Wednesdays. So I do telemedicine the other days. Just in our area, we're pretty rural. And so I feel guilty asking a sleepy person to hop in a car and, come see me in clinic.
Yeah.
And so we can do it via and that, I'm a little bit biased just because we've done so much telemedicine for so many years. So I'm completely biased. But we very seamlessly transitioned. It was literally like the next clinic day. We're 100% telemedicine from 100% in person. We are doing more home sleep apnea testing. And I think that's twofold. Like, one is that we want to keep our techs safe, and our patients are kind of reluctant to come in. So I think there's two parts of it, especially this idea that CPAP is aerosol generating. And so we really do need to be mindful and thoughtful. And I think it is our responsibility to take care of our staff, right? Like, we don't want to just expose our staff unnecessarily. And I think it's our responsibility to take care of them. And so if we can answer that question, do they have sleep apnea, yes or no? If we can answer that without putting the tech in harm's way, why wouldn't we do that?
That's a good point. And thank you for that. So we're coming to an end here. I would just like to tell everyone, because there was a question here in the chat, that those of you that have signed up for this webinar, you will be sent a link tomorrow or the day after. I'm not promising anything on behalf of William here, but yes, you will have a link to the presentation. You can always stay in touch with me or Dr. Khosla. She left her email here. You can find it in the recording if it was not up for too long. But yeah, I would just like to thank you very much, Dr. Khosla, for a great presentation, and thank you all for attending. This is the last webinar that we are hosting this year, and we will definitely continue the conversation through webinars like these next year. And if you have any ideas, and if you have anything you would want to present on our platform, please stay in touch with us. Otherwise, just enjoy your Thanksgiving holiday We don't get to enjoy that here in Iceland. I will do though, just for you guys. And we'll see you again next year. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Snorri.